what's going on? This is the OG Kickoff, a double down and next round media production. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, it is a football week. It is not quite a football week for Dae'Quan Wright, Xavier Harris, and any other NFL players that LSU has added to its roster. But it is a week 0. It is technically a football week. Shout out those guys. They're playing football, man. Good for them.
Look, it's a big football week for them. Last week, they were practicing in the NFL. This week, they're practicing for college football. Exactly. Yeah, they were. Every week's a football week when you're playing football, I guess.
Good Lord. So this is where we're at. For those who have not heard, by the way, great pod lined up. Jim Dunaway going to join us in a little bit to discuss the news we got over the weekend with Keelon Russell as Bama's QB1, what it means for Bama's offense in 2026. We're going to dig later into, I think later in the week, we're going to do some quarterback stuff, just in terms of the decisions that we got. We have Flat of the Week. We have a new award that we're making up. We have a lot of things that we're going to get to that we're going to fit into today's pod. But Will, we have to start with this because your Bayou Bengals have made history. Thank you, Drew Rosenhaus, for that. Dae'Quan Wright, if this goes through and if the SEC does not ultimately put its foot down and do what it appears the Big Ten and ACC are doing right now by saying NFL players are not allowed to come back and return to college football, then Dae'Quan Wright will be the first player ever to come from the NFL and play in college football because he cleared waivers for the Cleveland Browns. Xavier Harris trying to do the same for LSU from Ole Miss's roster last year. Interconference transfer rules be damned. Lawsuits. SEC doesn't want any of that smoke. What a time. What a time.
It's beautiful, man. It's beautiful.
Is it?
I mean, I have had this take, and you know this for years. I said this off air. I know I'm going to get called LSU homer guy. Let's start here. Connor, can you tell me an LSU homer take that I've had on this podcast before we get started?
About this specific team or just the past?
Just in the 5-6 years we've been doing this. Is there something that I've said that you've gone, wow, that guy is really just an LSU. He's blinded by the purple and gold.
That LSU is perfectly fine to not spend $1 million on Dominic Williams, and that Brian Kelly saying what he did in the post-spring transfer portal world was perfectly fine and that he wasn't doing anything wrong.
Hey, they would have been cooked regardless. That's the thing, because I didn't think that team was that good. And I was right. And so I don't think they were one guy away from that team being good. And so that's, in thinking about this, everybody's going to say, oh, you're an LSU fan, whatever. But throughout the course of this podcast, I have said over and over again, when you open this Pandora's box, you are either hoping for the NCAA or the federal government to save you. Me and one of my best friends have had a 10-year-long argument. Who's dumber, the NCAA or the federal government? And this is the natural last step here, okay? So everybody's freaking out because it was Lane Kiffin. Do you want to talk about the Texas player?
The Texas player is not doing what Dae'Quan Wright did, which was play on an NFL roster and then come back and play after clearing waivers, signing an NFL contract, having 6 figures in earnings, which is way more than the $427 that Harry Carter got suspended 2 games for.
And what did I say about that? We both said, fight it, play him. And
yes.
This is what happens, right?
Look, here's where I will agree with you on this.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're a fan, you want to see your coach doing whatever he can to possibly make his team better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Like that's the part where from the pearl clutching standpoint, I'll agree with you on look, if all of a sudden, like everybody else was doing this, you would not want to be the Dabo Sweeney of the bunch and being like, nope, I'm going to stick with my way. So I'll agree with you on that standpoint.
Right.
If you're just looking at this objectively speaking and saying in college football, this is a situation that we're actually dealing with as we're approaching week 0, that this guy played in an NFL preseason game and is now, unless we get a ruling, unless we all of a sudden we get an actual ruling instead of just the temporary restraining order, this guy could be playing for LSU this year and was added to a roster that, oh, by the way, already included Trey Green, the best returning tight end in college football. And he's kind of going to be playing like half as many snaps, or at least Dae'Quan Wright, maybe playing half as many snaps as he did last year for Ole Miss. It's objectively bonkers that this is actually happening and not good that we can just circumvent all these different things and that guys like this can just come back and play and be added at the 11th hour.
And I think it's awesome, not as an LSU fan, but as a fan of the sport, because let me tell you why. It sickens me when people, specifically men in this case, in leadership positions, refuse to be leaders. Okay, I made this point about the DeMond Williams thing at Washington when Lane Kiffin tried to poach him. What we need is collective bargaining, a players union, and standards across the board. And the more that anyone, Lane Kiffin specifically, pushes these made-up BS rules, the more some adult is finally going to take off their diapers and fix this sport. And so ultimately, it's so funny to me that we have this line in the sand. Like Dan Lanning comes out and says, well, you can't have NFL players playing in college football. Sir, your team was a swamp before Phil Knight showed up. Money made your team. So acting like the moral authority on paying players outrageous is so funny to me.
I don't think that's what he's saying, though. I would disagree with that's what he's saying. I think there is some pearl clutching that's going on. He's not saying that money is not a part of it. He's saying these guys have already made the decision to be in the NFL. And at one point, when you've already made the decision to be in the NFL, and then you're deciding, no, I'm gonna come back to college. That's the point where I don't think it's necessarily just like about money with these head coaches. Like they'll find some money in the couch cushions to be able to incentivize these guys. We were kind of debating like how much do you think Dae'Quan Wright is making as, you know, this guy who's coming into a situation at LSU where obviously he already knows the offense. Like, is he making $400,000 to $500,000? Probably, if it's incentivizing him that much, as opposed to making like $200,000 as a practice squad player plus the $115K or whatever that he's going to have to give back allegedly. Like, you're being incentivized by in some sort of way. I don't think Dan Lanning is saying it from like, oh, it's ridiculous that teams would pay. I think it's ridiculous to be like, these guys have already had the benefit of like NFL strength camps and like playing actual NFL competition, then come back to college. That's considered the bridge too far for at least some people. I realize not everybody.
Right. Dan Lanning wants us to stay right where we're at, where Phil Knight can save his team, where his team can go to the Big Ten across the country. What does Oregon State think about that? Okay, they got left behind. I'm sure they're not fans of the Phil Knight system, okay? But I'm saying these coaches will do whatever benefits them. And if somebody actually stood up, in this way, I actually respect Dabo, because at least he has some level of moral to say, this is how I run a program, and not I'm going to blow in the wind. So all I'm saying there is it's funny to me that the guy who plays for the team that was built by NIL money, that was built by Nike, is sitting here saying, oh, this is an affront to what the sport has become. That is a domino of where we are here. Another thing, two things that got said about this immediately that were hilarious to me. These guys are going to take some kid's spot. This is how I knew people were not talking in good faith about this. LSU has the space for these kids.
Yeah, I mean, they have, in theory, have the space for it because Lane Kiffin is saying we will make the space for it. We are living in an era in which everybody's complaining that the elite teams can't build depth. And Lane's like, I know we already got this stud tight end that I got to stay here, Travis Green. I know we already have multiple guys we're going to talk about today who can play in the slot, who can do that successfully. But like, let's just add the guy that had one of the biggest touchdowns of the year, Dae'Quan Wright, who had like a go-ahead touchdown in the final 4 minutes of a college football playoff semifinal game that almost was the touchdown that got Ole Miss into a national championship. Let's just add that guy. Like, let's just do it because we don't necessarily have these guardrails. We'll use the fact that he has this, you know, that you have this ruling in the state of Louisiana where the SEC, by releasing this statement, has basically said to the world, we don't want lawsuits. We want the NCAA to have the lawsuits. We don't want to have the lawsuits over our interconference transfer rule. That's why it's not being enforced. That's why they came out with this strong statement against players coming back from the NFL and playing in college, and then adding the line at the end of like, this is why we need to protect College Sports Act. It just means more. It just means nothing. It means absolutely nothing to come out and say something like that. So like, credit to Lane in that way, in that he is at least saying, well, I'm going to do this until someone tells me I'm not going to be able to. Like, and you're right in that there are so many fans across college football. In their heart of hearts, they want their head coaches to be doing this. But we can all step back and go, guys, this is like not what we signed up for at all. We are one step away, Will, from NFL draft bust. Saying, you know what? I was kind of drafted in the wrong situation. Rookie year didn't really work out. I did leave college a year early. Let me go back. Let me go back after I've already played a year. Let me do. We are one step away from that. And that's the thing that's so hard to fathom that I think people are struggling to wrap their heads around. But I'll agree with you. Like, miss me with the whole, like, oh, you're taking a roster spot away from this, like, one random. That's not the world we're living in anymore.
Okay. Love that you brought up the SEC statement because they're part of that was shining to me like a bright light. Individuals who choose to leave college athletics, sign professional playing contracts, and compete professionally should not then be permitted to return to college competition. Connor, these guys did not choose to leave college competition.
They did.
No, they didn't have any eligibility left.
Until the 5-for-5 ruling, which is why this set of circumstances has existed in the way that it has. I get it from that standpoint.
They didn't opt out of college. They ran out of eligibility in a ruling that has now been invalidated. So if somebody walked up to them 2 months ago and said, "Hey, dude, you could go back to college," they may have done that.
2 months ago, perhaps. I think what's the difficult thing to wrap your head around is they have already made the decision. I will be in the NFL. It's not like, oh, hey, you were just chilling doing like some 9-to-5 type job or something like that. No, you have already crossed the line to
They're good at football. So if they're working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, they could have come back and it would have been fine.
Yes. That's what I'm saying.
I know you're being devil's advocate here. You're not the Southeastern Conference, right? I'm talking kind of through you in this way, but it's, I mean, you're punishing a guy for being good at football. Like,
let's not call it punishment. Come on, let's not call it punishment. Like that's.
But okay, we can have teams that we laud for saying you have these dudes who are 23, 24, 25. They're gamers. They've been in the system forever. They're veterans, and the NFL didn't want them. But you have NFL teams take a look at you. And that means, okay, you're done. You could be younger than plenty of guys on rosters, as some of these guys are. So that, to me, is where the pearl clutching falls short, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, I get it. I still don't expect them to play. Like, I think that there will be, at some point, there will be a resistance within the conference. I think there will be too much noise for this to ultimately happen. And I think there's going to be too much blowback. But at this point, it looks like this can at least, there's a pathway for it to happen, not necessarily in the Big Ten, not necessarily in the ACC, who have already come out against this. But like, that statement was Charmin soft. Like, it just was. And miss me with Steve Sarkisian coming out, like being like, oh, yeah, it's just, we don't really know. If Pete Golding were doing this, and if Pete Golding were stealing players from LSU's roster, you think old Lane is just going to be like, is going to get that type of criticism? Do you think that Sark would have called out Pete Golding in the basket weaving university? I think he would have. There's no way. Like, because this is Lane, Sark is taking that road, and because Sark is like, oh, hey, well, we had the Cole Hudson thing happen the way that we did. It's not exactly the same situation as Dae'Quan Wright, but it's Lane doing this, so I'm gonna just like take a step back and not call my guy out. When like, everybody in their heart of hearts knows, like, this is objectively ridiculous. This is insane. And I don't want to defend it, but I also don't want to pretend like we're just, living in a world in which everybody should be standing up for it when there's just so much to gain. Like, I totally get that.
That's exactly my point here, right? Is that ultimately, okay, I've said before, nobody loves gossiping more than over 30-year-old dudes in the Southeast. And Lane Kiffin is like these people's Kim Kardashian, right? I mean, people love to just sit around and tell, oh, did you see what Lane Kiffin did today? Okay. And so that being said, again, I feel that it would be malpractice as LSU's football coach when you have a thin roster from losing Brian Kelly, when you have to reload your entire roster in the transfer portal era to not explore an option if these players are eligible. Okay. It's not to Lane Kiffin if they're eligible. It's not up to the SEC. It's barely up to the NCAA. So ultimately, being the guy at the bottom of the chain who's going to catch heat for this is so frustrating to me. Like, I told you, I was shocked that everybody was on Jaden Daniels' side, because anything that Lane Kiffin touches now is like, we hate that Lane Kiffin guy. And again, I'm not going to get into the double standard there, but I do have one more point on this, which is, again, going back to you're taking kids' opportunities. This is so disgusting. We're talking about essentially a backup tight end who's going to play probably inline, right? A role that Tre'Davious Green is not fired up about. Tre'Davious Green is probably going to be used better now because he's going to be running routes that he wants to run. He's going to be used effectively because it's not, we're running basically one tight end personnel and we can
They'll play 12 personnel. They'll use them both kind of in the slot and in line. Like, they both have that in their bag.
Exactly. And we're fundamentally talking about a backup tight end that likely would be a portal guy next year anyway. Like, it's not like a guy would be getting the reps back in the day. But the thing about that's funny to me is Harris is effectively taking the spot of one of 2 or 3 freshman defensive tackles in the SEC. And I had Georgia fans like, oh my God, I can't believe he's taking this role. Which freshman defensive tackle has had the right to start in the Southeastern Conference? There's been like 3 guys under Kirby who have started as a freshman defensive tackle. So what they're mad about is that Lane is not being punished for taking over this new roster, and he's getting a depth piece or a veteran in a spot where they hoped LSU would be thin. We talked about this in the last episode about this, where they were weak in the run game because their DTs were thin, right?
It does answer that question, which is kind of funny.
Right.
You texted me yesterday. So like, LSU, I guess, going to be better in the trenches. I guess we got an answer to our question. Let's stop there.
Yeah, there's not some 4 or 5 year senior who's like, oh, mom, I'm not going to play this year. It's an 18-year-old kid who never would have played on those Les Miles teams.
It's because he's stealing it from Ole Miss, too. And like, Chris Lowe tweeted this out. Xavier Harris blasted Lane Kiffin during the playoff run and was one of the biggest Pete Golding guys. And to think now that he's potentially going to be playing for LSU and that Lane has basically been able to hide behind this ruling in Louisiana and say like, oh, the interconference transfer rule doesn't apply to this and I can like hide behind it. People view that as snakish because of everything that Lane has said and done about Ole Miss. Like, that's the context. It's not just simply, well, we don't like the cut of his jib and this is just bad for college sports. No. All that context is worth bringing up because if he were doing this and he were stealing a player from Cal, it has a little bit of a different tenor than what he's doing stealing from Ole Miss, when in theory, those guys were supposed to be coming back to their specific schools, like the Cole Hudson situation, the Stephen Daly situation. Those guys are like going back to the schools where they came from. They're not then getting poached and then having to be able to circumvent a rule that's already in place and then having the conference come out and basically be like, well, we don't want lawsuits. They didn't say that. They should have. And everybody's like, Lane Kiffin gamed the system. And that's never going to sit well with anybody. And that's why everybody's so upset.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I'm not Mr. Sour Grapes here. I promise you. I mean, I'm not going to go too long on talking about the Trinidad Chambliss situation, but it's funny that nobody batted an eye about, we got to judge you with the Ole Miss and he made this really favorable rule because everybody accepted it, right? But do that in Louisiana, and he
played in Division II. I never saw him play. I had no sort of backing with that. As far as I know, those games at Ferris State never even happened, and I just wanted some more Trinidad Chambliss.
That's actually so true. We all just collectively went, you know what? Fine, I want to see you play. And so did I. I'm glad he could play. But that's kind of my point. Is like, I'm done being mad at any of this stuff. And if you're still being mad at this, like, let's go back to the BCS, man. Like, it's so far gone at this point that the best we could do is intentionally break it. That's how laws get started, is people break the law so bad that finally somebody goes, here, damn, and they just fix it. So, like, I've said this
collective bargaining.
Literally.
Collective bargaining. Yes.
And this is the only thing scarier than a union. So let's do it.
Give us collective bargaining. Give us September 19th in Oxford, Mississippi. LSU Ole Miss. We don't fast forward time in this life, but get me to that game. I cannot wait. Oh, I cannot wait. All right, Will.
Give me to a Dabo statement about week 1.
Got a whole lot of people. I should have probably mentioned in that video that we put out there. Shout out Michael Dark. Riled up the masses. Michael attached in that email in which he predicted Georgia Southern would be the Grim Reaper for Dabo Swinney and Clemson. I should have added that Michael is a Georgia Southern grad. He included pictures of his graduation as well. I should have just thrown that in there as the very last thing as well. Like, oh, by the way, Michael went to Georgia State or Georgia Southern.
He actually is a homer. This is not a conspiracy Clemson fan. It's much funnier this way, though.
Oh, I love it. All right. Let's talk SEC Comeback Player of the Year, Will, because the AP has a National Comeback Player of the Year. And they started doing this in 2018. I feel like it doesn't really get talked about that much. It gets talked about in the NFL a lot. Byron Brown actually was one of the 3 players to win it last year when he was at USF, obviously now at Auburn. But the SEC does not have one. And they have an award for pretty much everything else. I think that should change. So we're going to do that here and now. You've heard it discussed in different sort of ways. What does it mean to be a comeback player of the year? But we are creating our own criteria here to have an SEC comeback player of the year, courtesy of the OG Kickoff. If you're going to have an award in college football, especially, you need a watch list. So that's what we're going to roll out today. We are going to roll out our SEC comeback player of the year watch list. Some great candidates this year. Before we get started, the criteria. You are
Is Dae'Quan Wright eligible for the comeback player of the year?
He was my first mention.
We're in lockstep today, Connor. Arian Carter, comeback player of the year?
Not Arian Carter. So Dae'Quan Wright, though. I mean, come on. If he's not on our watch list, what are we doing? So here's the criteria. A, if you went to the NFL and came back to play college football, if you suffered a significant injury last year, or you know what, let's say like a significant injury in the offseason as well. You had an extenuating circumstance that led to you just not meeting expectations last year, where maybe it's like, hey, coordinator was really bad, like you had a terrible offensive line that you were playing behind, or something like that. Like, oh, you had all 5 receivers were out, or something like that. Like Jackson Arnold could have been comeback player of the year. I was trying to think of like who would win this last year, and like Casey Concepcion would have been a really good candidate. There would have been a lot of really good candidates across college football for comeback player of the year. Or, and this is an important thing to add here, if you entered last season with high expectations and then you were just basura, that needs to always be a comeback player of the year distinction, because it is in the NFL. Like when Sam Darnold won it, it was just like, oh, well, he was just really bad the year before, and therefore he earned it by being not really bad a year later. So that's the criteria. Anything else that we should add to that?
So we have the entire spectrum from you underperformed, middle is your coach was trash, all the way to the right side is you got shot.
Yes. all the above. And worth mentioning, there is a difference between a breakout and a comeback. If Nick Harbor has 1,000-yard season and puts it all together, I would argue that's more of a breakout, because his career has actually kind of followed a somewhat linear progression, and he maybe hasn't lived up to the sky-high expectations that he came in with. 3-time winner of the Bruce Feldman's #1 freak in college football. But I would still argue, like, it's not like he had like this breakout freshman season and then a setback. And, I think his career arc is a little bit different than that. So these are kind of the non-linear guys, or the guys who have endured something pretty significant this offseason. I do not believe, and correct me if you think I'm misspeaking here, I don't think Arch Manning should be eligible for this, nor do I even think like Cam Coleman, who still improved by over 100 yards last year, or Ryan Wingo, who improved by nearly 400 yards. I don't think those guys are quite eligible for this list.
Yeah, I think just being mid doesn't really constitute for like a comeback. I think it's just like it's not like the player of the year. That, to your point, could be a breakout, could be a couple of different things, but you got to have like some real adversity, which through a couple of games could have been Arch, but he kind of played himself out of being so trash that he would be eligible for this.
I agree. And like, it was his first season as a starter. So what was he coming back? What would he be returning to form to look like? The guy who looked all right in some like kind of random snaps in 2024, like you have to be coming back to something, you know what I mean? So that's kind of how I would define it. Maybe some would disagree on that. Okay. Dae'Quan Wright on obviously on the watch list. Ahmad Hardy has to be on this. If you come back from getting shot and you're still elite, you deserve to be part of the comeback player of the year discussion. Okay. And we already know he's not playing in the season opener. It's Arkansas Pine Bluff. Take that for what it is. It sounds like they're being really careful with him. Drink didn't want to provide a timetable for his return, kind of a different tone, it felt like, than what we heard from him at ICC Media Days, where we learned that he had been medically cleared. That was a positive update. But I think that they're trying to play the long game with him and trying to make sure that he doesn't come back and immediately re-injure that. The sensitive nature of this injury, it's different than probably what a lot of trainers have worked with. It's one thing if like, hey, you're coming back off a high ankle sprain, or hey, you have this, this knee dislocation or something like that. Like there's kind of a set roadmap for that. It's a little bit different with some of the circumstances that Ahmad Hardy is obviously working with after the tragedy that he endured this summer, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a rare instance in which a guy could, in theory, have half of his production from last year, and I would argue he could still be a candidate. Like if Ahmad Hardy has 800 rushing yards this year and double-digit touchdowns, I'd go comeback player of the year discussion. I think that's perfectly okay. If he still looks every bit as good as he did last year, then I think he'd be worth it for what he's had to overcome this offseason.
I have one more quip before I talk about the actual serious and inspirational nature of this young man. I had a fantasy football draft for college football the other day. One of my buddies, who is a Miami fan and therefore does not listen to the pod in the offseason, took Ahmad Hardy like too high. And I was like, hey, you haven't been listening to the pod, have you? And he's like, what do you mean? Why? And I was like, have you kept up with him this offseason? Do you know what happened to him? He's like,
just
one
Google would have done it.
And I was like, let me just grab Jamal Roberts a couple rounds later. Let me it was so funny watching him realize that. I was like, this is your fault. You should have been listening to our SEC pod. He's a Miami fan. So I kind of just like, but no, I mean, it just goes to show how wild that story is, right? And how much like it's not his fault. This is such a sad, tragic situation that happened to this young man. And it can be kind of an inspiration for so many people. And so we saw this with Brian Robinson Jr. when he was on the Commanders. And I feel like, it's one of those things where, it's not even like an injury where sometimes like, oh, are you overtraining? Are you sleeping? Are you doing all this? It's just a freak, terrible situation, wrong place, wrong time. And so I'm going to be rooting for this dude. And I hope that he has, to your point, 50% of the season, 75% of the season, so many of these things, walking out of that with his life was a win. And so I think on the Dude's Rock situation, he's already impressed me. He doesn't necessarily have to do more, but I think to kind of be the best in that category over the SEC, he could just be a version of who he was, maybe save some tread on the tires in the NFL. And hopefully he gets some of those carries split over to Jamal Roberts, and he isn't, a billion carries like Drake sometimes likes to do. So yeah, I just hope we get the best version of him. Would you like that?
I do too. And I don't know that we will. Again, we're talking about an upper leg injury that clearly was significant. And this is someone who last year was really, really good at those yards after first contact. And so that's going to be something that if he's right, you'll see that play out. You'll see him breaking tackles. You'll see him, running that stretch zone and looking like the guy that, man, he can just be shot out of a cannon. And he can break through and have those big, long touchdown runs. And I do think that the Mizzou approach to this is one that is very conservative and very understandably so. All right, Ryan Coleman-Williams, obvious candidate, did not get shot. More of the basura variety here, video game cover than the third option in the passing game the majority of the time last year. Last year when he made a play, it felt like, oh, Ryan Williams is out there. Remember him? And that's not great, obviously. And we've talked a lot about him, talked about him extensively in our receiver draft. We're going to talk about him in a little bit here with Jim Dunaway. The bar for him as comeback player of the year would at least be putting himself into the Julio Amari conversations. And I don't mean that from a straight production standpoint, because like Julio had 1,200 scrimmage yards, 9 touchdowns in his pre-draft season. And Amari was obviously a Heisman finalist with 124 catches that year. So I'm not saying that that's the expectation for Ryan Coleman-Williams this year. What I am saying is that if he is putting himself into the Julio and Amari conversations, it'll be he looks like a star, a future first-round pick, an obvious first-team All-SEC receiver who just endured a sophomore slump, and it will maybe be reminiscent of those two. So he is a huge candidate for this. It's not quite post-hype because I think he was good enough as a true freshman to warrant this discussion. But yeah, him being comeback player of the year, of the non-quarterbacks, he might be the most obvious candidate on this list.
Yeah, the thing about him is he can't really ever be like, he's not a quiet player or individual, right? Like he can't just have a middle of the pack season. It's going to be what's wrong with Ryan Coleman-Williams. It's going to be like, he's the type of guy, he's very Gen Z, for lack of a better word. He reminds me a lot of the NBA players I used to cover. And that mentality, I think, is more coming into college football, where it's like, he isn't going to be a guy necessarily who like puts his head down and gets through it. He's always going to have something else. He's always going to have he's always going to be on game cover. He's always going to have like fingernails, tattoos, something. And so that's the type of player that stuff looks awesome when you're winning and when you're performing. But when you're not, it could be the source of ridicule. And so particularly like obviously in the Southeast, not like he's playing at Cal or something. And so that being said, I think that for him, he's an incredibly talented player. And I think he was in his own head some of the time last year. I think that his first year, he had a really strong start. I think the offense let him down. I think the game plan wasn't very good. I think year 2 is a little bit more on him. He'll tell you that. He talks about that at media days, about the drops and everything. I think if he had just converted on more of his opportunities, what we've seen at Ty Simpson, even at the NFL level in the brief sample size, is making DeBoer want him back. But that being said, I think that it's probably not Ty Simpson's fault that he had I don't think Ty Simpson throws a less catchable ball than Jalen Milroe. I don't think anybody would probably say that. And so I think Ryan Williams would be the first to tell you that he underperforms. So I think that he's the type of player who I love to root for, when things are going well for him. And I tend to feel a little bit sorry for him when they're not, because I know the noise is louder externally. So I'm really just rooting for him to have a great season. And again, changing the name is one of those things where it's like, oh, is this a new player? Is this Ryan Williams? And I hope he backs it up this year because he's a really cool guy.
Some are saying that he was trying to be more like Cam Coleman. And that's why. No, I'm kidding. I do think that there's still a lot to like with his game. I get why there are certain people that will just root against him and just don't want to see his personality succeed. He is a flashy player. In this day and age on the internet, if you are flashy and if you don't deliver, you get dragged. It doesn't have to be just a Bama thing. It's a thing in the NFL. If you are a flashy guy who does not produce, people will let you know about it. And he is in that camp. He is a household name in this sport, even with his new name, new number as well. And I'm excited to see what it looks like with Keelon Russell. I am, because I think he's a guy that could stand to benefit from, like, he could, in a weird way, he could fit in with Keelon Russell's skill set more than what he did with Ty Simpson. Because if this is about extending plays and being a guy that you just don't want to have to cover for 5-6 seconds, maybe he's not great at getting separation off of pure route running in the way that like a Jeremy Bernard was, but he can do those other things, then maybe that's where we're really going to see him pop. And having all the reps that he's had in SEC play, being able to be kind of smarter in some of those spots, I think should benefit him. Though I'm not going to sit here and pretend like, oh, I think he's going to be a bona fide All-American this year. I'm on record saying, like, I think Lottie Brooks could be one of the breakout players in the SEC and could lead Bama in receiving this year. So yeah, I am excited to see what year 3 looks like for Ryan Coleman-Williams. All right, well, LaNorris Sellers, he's the most obvious guy on this list, I think, the entire list. You know how much he struggled. 40 sacks taken, most in the country, 4-8 team. Mike Shula gets fired. The ground game is putrid. The receiver options just aren't there. Nothing around LaNorris Sellers helped. Okay. And I got into this a little bit with like A&M fans because I ranked LaNorris Sellers 2 spots ahead of Marcel Reed in my SEC quarterback rankings. And I said, if you actually watched that football game and told yourself that LaNorris Sellers had the same surroundings as Marcel Reed, you're crazy. Okay. Like Marcel Reed had all these different boxes checked where he had like an elite defensive mind that was working for him. He had offensive line continuity. He had a future first-round receiver. He had an offensive coordinator that was very coveted. And LaNorris Sellers had like none of that. Okay.
He had one dude who took off into the tunnel on an amazing play, got screamed at by a cop, hurt himself on the same play, came back, made an incredible 4th down play, didn't come back in the game. That was the extent of his help on that day.
Nick Harbour still does not want to talk about that too. Like he got asked at SEC Media Days about that, and he's like, I'm gonna stay away from that one. What happened, and I'm gonna leave it at that. So you know that you had the reinforcements come in on the offensive line, banged up in spring. Jacarius B coming over from NC State. He's going to be banged up for the start of the season. Jaden Gibson, and then LaNorris's brother, Jaden Sellers, he was really looking forward to being able to play with. Those 2 receivers both go down with season-ending injuries. That has already happened. But you have this potential redemption arc for LaNorris with Kendall Briles coming in as the OC. The scheme change could benefit him greatly. Are the surroundings there? And did enduring that punishment last year of taking all of those sacks, being a really durable player, because like that's kind of the quiet thing. Like if there was one positive to take from last year is that he was more durable than he was a season prior, when it felt like the first half of that 2024 season, he was like leaving all of these different games. And then when he finally stayed on the field, he was really good. He was more durable last year. So that's the good news. But could enduring that punishment prevent him from being the player that he was in the latter half of 2024? We're not going to know until we know. We really won't. Like, I still think it's wild to think that South Carolina has never had a quarterback finish as an all-SEC quarterback. For what it's worth, LaNorris Sellers very much should have ahead of Quinn Ewers in 2024. I'll continue to push back on that. But if he checks that box this year, and if LaNorris Sellers is an all-SEC quarterback, which is within one of the paths that he has this year, I think that is within the realm of possibility. I think that would make him an obvious candidate to win this award.
Connor, speaking of like old school SEC gamesmanship, I'm old enough to remember when guys like Percy Harvin and Trenton Holiday, they're trying to sneak them into the track rosters and get free scholarships there. I think that LaNorris Sellers should have qualified for a free track scholarship based on the football he played last year. If you watch that dude, it looked like he was doing a steeplechase every game. Looked like he was having to move laterally up and down through water. He was doing an obstacle course. I've never seen. There was like some number that feels made up. That
was
the
LSU game. I remember Cole threw that out there, and it was like the amount of distance that he covered was just insane. And it was like this. That's not the distance a starting quarterback should ever have to cover. But when you're running for your life, and the way LaNorris Sellers was, it kind of makes sense.
That's what it was. It was like 800 yards. It was a number that was like 6 would have been ridiculous. 8 was like, how did you even survive that? And so, that being said, I mean, it truly took that specific combination of things to happen. Hate to say we were right about Mike Shula, but I feel like pretty much anyone could have seen that. Like, we're not geniuses here. It went exactly the way that any Bama fan over 30 would have told you it was going to go. But that being said, they actually have upgraded with Kendall Briles. I mean, I genuinely believe any average offensive coordinator could get something out of Sellers. And so, to your point, I mean, one of the things, and I see it's down here a little bit with Nick Harbor, but like at least he progressed a little bit, and at least those two guys are back together again. Maybe that's the positive we can look at here. But I think this one's an easy one, right? Exactly your point. A guy that's very easy to root for, a guy that stuck with South Carolina, that was kind of brought into a leadership role early. Number one, they talked about potentially basically, what was it, KD Jefferson that they were going to go look at, and they ended up staying with Sellers. And then they said, hey, we're going to re-recruit you after this kind of miserable year last year. Who do you want to be the OC? Kind of bring you in more of that leadership, almost like CEO, NFL quarterback role to prepare you for that. And I think that on one end, I can feel bad for him for last year, while also saying this is a no excuses year for this year. Because if you were part of that process and you said, hey, I want this OC, I want to run this type of offense, I want these type of looks, then we're going to expect the best version of him. And I think college football truly is better when quarterbacks like that can play well. And it's not just a couple of teams at the top in the SEC. So, I'm really rooting for the kid. And I think it's going to be a major bounce back for him.
I hope so. Just because it was so fun to watch. It was so fun to watch when he was right. And I don't have Nick Harbor on this list for what it's worth. Like, coming back from what? Like, no, that'd be a breakout year. But LaNorris, like, let's not forget how good he was in the latter half of 2024. Okay. Like that half of the season was one of the better stretches that we've seen from an SEC quarterback in the 2020s. And will that resurface, and will it be evident when we watch his game? A massive question. Okay. So I said I didn't have Nick Harbor. I do have LaNorris's teammate, one Dylan Stewart. And this might be a little bit of a surprise here, but I'm going to make the case for him to be at least on the watch list. My case is that this is someone who was a preseason All-American last year, who then at season's end only earned a second-team All-SEC nod from the coaches. He only had 4.5 sacks, only one of which came post-September when he started dealing with that back injury. He was still really disruptive. I mean, 12 TFLs, 3 forced fumbles. Nothing about his game last year gave NFL people the ick, which is why he's still all over these mock drafts. Like, he hasn't really fallen off in terms of being a national household name in the sport, but he's banged up going into the season. He missed all of the spring. What Shane Beamer is very clearly doing with his stars is not messing around with that back injury. The thing about his game that is so special is the bend. And I don't really get into a lot of the NFL draft traits as much, because I think when it comes to talking about guys at college, I don't really think college fans care as much about that stuff. But his bend has been so noticeable to even the average fan, to see a guy rush off the edge at 18 years old and do the things that he did. Like, from the moment he stepped on the field as a true freshman, and he made that play where both he and the quarterback were like, wait a minute, how did you get here that quickly? And they both didn't know what to do. It was like a scene that was shot out of a movie. And you go, this would never actually happen in real life. And it did. It was because this is someone that has those very special twitchy traits. And so much of it is when he's right and his back is feeling at 100%, he's lethal. And you have to do the things like what Kentucky did to him as a true freshman, which is try and triple team him and hope that he doesn't somehow get to your quarterback. But I think he's worthy of being on this list when you add in that context of knowing that he was nowhere near 100%. in the final 2 months of last season, and was someone that I think had sky high expectations. And you look back on those numbers, and yes, sack numbers can be overrated at times. It doesn't mean that a player is necessarily regressed, but you're like, hey, that's a guy that, if he's right, he's getting way more than 4.5 sacks in a given season. So I think he should be included just for the chance that if he ends up having like a 15 sack season, which is like, if he's right and he's healthy, again, he's going to be out for week 1 at least, then he needs to be considered for comeback player of the year.
Yeah. I mean, he's exactly, I would say, the defensive version of what happened to Sellers last year, right? Where, okay, in 2024, you have all these dudes that are helping you develop, that are taking away pressure. Chalka Hemingway and those boys, they had so much
surroundings. It's a good point, Will.
Yeah. I mean, they had so much leadership, specifically in the front seven, where it's like, okay, like if you're just going to be an edge rusher, it's kind of see ball, get ball. A little bit of what we saw with Harold Perkins, right? Where it's like, we're going to simplify things for you, get after the quarterback. These other guys can help on the back end. But that being said, when you come back and you are the star player and you're at the top of the scouting reports, and not only that, but are 2 through 5, not as deep as the 1 through 6 were, before. It's like, if we can triple team this guy, to your point, and not let these other guys get through that were such impactful players. Some of those guys we're seeing pop on NFL rosters now going, oh, wow, I remember this guy's still doing it, right? And so that being said, I think that's that like coming back again and getting the ability to say, hey, we know what we struggled with last year. Let's fix over an offseason. I think that their defense is really underrated. I think it's been kind of the unsung story of the South Carolina team, where we've talked a lot about the offense because it's been so loud, but defensively they've been such a solid unit, outside of a couple of blemishes here and there, right? Where they've created these big turnovers. They've created these negative yardage plays that have really felt like you're trapped in the sandstorm. And I think that that's the area that feels
nice
like
pun.
Clearest.
Nice pun, Will. That's good.
Feels like that's the area that would be the easiest to project going forward, because they've been pretty good on defense almost every year. So yeah, I see big things for Stewart.
There's another guy that we're going to get to, kind of similar situation, where you kind of wondered going into last season, losing all those guys on the defensive side of the ball to the NFL draft, including a Nick Eamon-Worry. You kind of wonder what's it going to look like with these edge rushers who probably saw more favorable matchups. And I realize we just talked about Dylan Stewart getting triple teamed at different times as a true freshman, but certainly it was fair to at least wonder what's it going to look like now that you're the guy, you're at the top of every scouting report. And maybe that was part of it, but I really think more than anything else, it was dealing with that back injury. All right. Nick Anderson, Kentucky wide receiver. Yeah. Another
This
SEC team for Nick Anderson. Nick, no K. It's pronounced differently. That's a New Girl reference for those who don't know that, but very important. He was eligible last year for this award, of course, but then he was both ineffective and banged up. Tough combination for someone who really hasn't popped since 2023. There's the only time in his college career in which you said Nick Anderson is a star. It's been very quiet. Outside of that, he's in year 5, third different SEC school. Sounds like Kentucky is kind of playing the long game with him, making sure that he doesn't get banged up in fall camp. As long as he's on the field, he's a candidate here. He is. This is someone who already had double-digit touchdown catches, who averaged 21 yards per catch for a full season back in 2023 for Oklahoma, had the second most catches and touchdown catches for a freshman in Oklahoma, albeit as a redshirt freshman, not a true freshman. Still very, very impressive what he did early in his career. We saw him be the hero in that Red River game in 2023. What's going to be tough is having that established rapport with Kenny Minchey. I think these are valuable reps that he's probably not necessarily getting by being limited in fall camp. I would tend to think, if I'm picking who's going to be the leading receiver for that Kentucky team, DJ Miller is a guy that they really, really like a lot. That's why they retained him when they had just pretty much an overhaul in terms of their roster and their personnel. But if Will Stein is saying, hey, you're good enough to be able to stay here, that's probably a pretty good sign. So I do like DJ Miller as kind of being like the go-to target for Kenny Minchey. But Anderson having some of those takeover games would make him a candidate. Like if he all of a sudden is at the face of one of these upset victories for year 1 Will Stein, I think then we need to talk about him being a real candidate down the stretch.
Yeah, it's funny because I was so excited for this guy on LSU. Longtime listeners have kind of heard my report on him. I'll just say this. Again, not great that we're looking at Big 12 games for the Hopium here, but if you want to go back and really just watch a special wide receiver, go watch his UCF game at Oklahoma. It's awesome. And so, he looks like shades of Mike Thomas before his injury. So hopefully you can get back to that. I'm really bullish on the Kentucky offense this year.
I'm intrigued. They have a chance to be fun. Again, no idea what to expect from that defense. Could be a little bit all over the place. But yeah, let's talk about another guy in that Kentucky offense, CJ Baxter. I'll never quit. I will never quit TJ Baxter.
This is like a rehab meeting for me and you. These are guys we just keep believing in.
I know. We just hold on to our stock and just hope maybe comeback player of the year. We're going to cash in. You had Sark come out and basically say that they cut him for cap space, damaged goods for Texas. I'm talking about nature of the beast of the sport. And I'll say this. In defense of Sark, which I don't really find myself doing that much anymore, but I get why on paper Texas would rather have a guy coming off a 1,000-yard season at the power conference level, like a Raleek Brown, like a Hollywood Smothers. I get why they would rather have those guys as opposed to CJ Baxter, who was coming off of 2 injury-plagued seasons. Of course, in 2024, he had the torn ACL in fall camp that sidelined him for the entire season as a result of my jinx that he would lead the SEC in rushing. But he just couldn't stay on the field last year. Trey Wisner and Baxter both basically like took turns being hurt last year. And then they essentially got told by Texas, nah, we're not really going to give you the money that you're looking for. So we're going to have to save cap space and just go in a different direction. That's kind of how this all played out. So Wisner ends up at Florida State. Baxter ends up at Kentucky. Smart move by Baxter, though, to see both the success that Will Stein had last year, producing a top 20 rushing attack at Oregon that was really fluid and all over the place. Like they thought Mekhi Hughes, the transfer from Tulane, was going to be the guy. And then they ended up being like on their 4th string running back. And they were still like a pretty good running team up until obviously they ran into Indiana. But like they also spent so much in this year 1 class on the offensive line that Will Stein has built. And knowing that those two things are probably working in your favor. So like that's why I do think we're talking about someone in Baxter that has this really frustrating history the last 2 years as being a potential comeback player, former Big 12 newcomer of the year. And as I always bring up, 100 scrimmage yards in a playoff game as an 18-year-old. That is not nothing. He was a 5-star recruit for a reason. He earned the RB1 duties at Texas as a true freshman ahead of Jonathan Brooks. Like let's not forget that as well. But it's another one of these guys where clearly the coaching staff is protecting against the injury history. They're making sure that they're not overusing him. When he's healthy, I think he's got 20 carry workhorse back potential. I still think he has all SEC potential. He has to stay healthy for a full year to be able to maximize that.
I'm still taking hits to this hopium you gave me before 2024 with this guy. You like painted this picture. He's like, he's a 5-star. He's a huge physical running back. I was like, let's go. I think it was 2 weeks before that dude like completely was out for the year. I'm still waiting to see that guy. I'm right there with you. I think that, especially for the guy that has the measurables and the physical tools, I unfortunately will just ride that ship straight into the ocean. I don't care. Like I could guy could be on a practice squad. I'd be like, let's give him a run. Let's give him a run. He's reminiscent of my guy. It was at Penn State for LSU early in the Brian Kelly years. That was like, was the IFG guy? What was his name?
Oh gosh, why am I blanking on his name? I know exactly
what I'm talking about. Where I'm just like, he's big. He was highly recruited. He can push the pile. And so, yeah, I'm always going to root for him, especially in this offense.
Noah Cain. That's a pull. Hope Noah's doing well. Really nice guy. Okay, speaking of LSU running backs, Caden Durham. He's an obvious candidate to be on this list. Remember last year when Caden Durham was preseason second-team All-SEC, and then he wasn't even top 20 in the SEC in rushing yards or rushing touchdowns? I remember that. Blame Brian Kelly, blame the LSU offensive line, blame every defense in America for understanding that a very banged-up Garrett Nussmeier couldn't exactly stretch the field. Blame all of it on everyone else. Maybe blame some of it on Caden Durham, but
don't blame Frank Wilson. His job is to make strong young men who give you a firm handshake. He will bench you if you do bad stuff, if you're running for 200 yards in the season. So watch out.
Yes. Golly, I can't think of anything worse than being in Brian Kelly's doghouse.
Yeah, being on that office just sounded like hell. I'm glad those guys are getting paid, honestly.
Goodness gracious. So he initially hit the portal, and then he decides, no, I'm going to stick around. I'm gonna be part of this Lane Kiffin, Charlie West Jr. rushing attack. The fall camp buzz is that he's going to be buried on the depth chart a bit. Make of that what you will. We'll see. If you step on the field and look the part, you could have a chance to lead one of the most respected run game schemers in the sport, lead his rushing attack. That's possible, unless you're Ulysses Bentley IV. We don't need to relitigate that situation. Maybe it does end up being Harlan Berry or Dylan Jones who kind of like take control of the backfield. But Durham being the face of a resurgent ground attack, especially as LSU tries to avoid running Sam Levitt, it at least seems possible. I'm not willing to give up yet on Caden Durham. I think it'll surprise some people that he's still at LSU because they obviously changed over that offense so drastically, but they basically said, hey, we like the running backs that you have already. We think Harlan Berry, Caden Durham, like they're very serviceable players. We could probably make them work. I'll be very interested to see kind of who emerges and if LSU is able to have one of these top 20 rushing attacks.
Yeah, it's interesting because I love him as a player, obviously. I think that, like, I'll never forget the South Carolina game that he had. And oh my gosh, we found our running back. He came from that power program, Duncanville in Texas. Colin Simmons was over there. They had a huge, like a super team. And I remember like the oh my gosh, Brian Kelly can commit. We got this guy. It's gonna be awesome. Or can recruit. And I hate to say it, but I feel like I've just kind of turned the page to Harlan Berry. That I took him in the kind of way too early Heisman thing. I'm excited for both of these guys. I think for my takes, a split backfield wouldn't be great, but I think overall there is a little bit of a it would be the LSU's best use of their personnel to use both of them. The problem is they're both kind of like smaller, like receiving back type guys. Caden Durham, he's got a neck on him, I will say. He is built like a toad. He's got some stance to him, so maybe he can be used as a little bit more of that power back. But man, what Josh Williams would have done for LSU the last couple of years, it feels like that's all they've had is these like faster, smaller guys. But yeah, I mean, with the ball, especially in his first year, Durham was so electric, man.
Yeah, and I do think Lane's been a little bit more willing to ride the hot hand in the backfield than I mean, if he has a guy that emerges last year like QB1 Lacey did, then QB1 Lacey, got more volume than anybody in college football, of course, at least at the power conference level. But yeah, we've seen in the past him have three-headed rushing attacks. That was kind of the MO early on for Kiffin at Ole Miss. So I don't want to sit here and set an expectation of, I think this guy is automatically going to be the dude, or based on what we've seen out of fall camp with this hierarchy or that. So I'm just leaving the door open for Caden Durham. If he wants to walk right through it, be my guest. It'd be fun to watch him at his best again. Okay, another guy from LSU, Trey Wilson. Trey Wilson is a guy that I last year drafted #1 overall as a bounce back candidate. Must add to the watch list here. I will never give up on Trey Wilson. He had the season-ending ankle injury that he suffered in the Georgia game, as he's once again having a monster game against Georgia, of course. Bummer of a season. It's unrealistic to say that he could be in the Lane Kiffin offense what Elijah Moore was. I don't think that's a fair bar to set. But when I think about the potential of a slot receiver, it's hard for me to move past an Elijah Moore and what he did back in 2020. But I do think he could have some takeover games where you just get him in the right matchups, and he's so reliable. I think he's really slippery in space. He just hasn't been able to stay on the field. That's been the biggest thing holding us back. I think he's just going to be one of those guys that can catch balls in traffic, and they really loaded up those veteran receivers in the portal. Always think that the slot position in an up-tempo offense is important because of the ability to allow your quarterback to just get to the line of scrimmage, see that a defense is out of position. They can't make the substitutions that they want, get it to that guy. And a guy that just understands spacing well. I just think that Trey Wilson could be someone who benefits from that. I understand that they also brought over Winston Watkins, a guy that really took off as a true freshman last year. And I do think that they kind of want him to be a huge part of that offense. But there's always opportunities for pass catchers in that offense. Like, Dejon Stribling didn't even break out really until the Georgia game last year. And now people are like, is this guy going to be rookie of the year in the NFL? There's a lot of buzz about him in the preseason. So I do think that there is a possibility that Trey Wilson, we have not seen the best of him just yet, but one of these guys that needs to stay on the field.
Yeah, I think we both avoided for the same reason. I know we both avoided, but during our receiver draft, taking LSU receiver because we didn't know kind of who was going to get the targets. And what I said at the time is the only guy I know I can count on is Trey Green. And boy, howdy, is everything changed about Trey Green.
I'll hold on. I'll buy more Trey Green stock if anybody's selling.
No, exactly. I was just more so saying, like, the only season I can envision is Trey Green of exactly how it's going to go. And it's like, well, wait, now we got another tight end in there. His role's going to change. To your point, it's going to benefit him. But it just goes to show, like, the Lane offense is just, like, revolving door of productivity. It feels like someone's going to be productive. You just don't know who. I think if I were to pick a guy for the reasons you just listed, it probably would be Trey Wilson. But I'm at this point with this old new roster where I'm like, hey, if I get attached to all these guys, I know most of them aren't going to pan out. So I want to see a couple of games. At least let me wait till the Clemson game to kind of fall in love with some dudes and let them let me down before I'm like, I'm so excited about this guy. I've had that happen to me too many times in the Brian Kelly years. But to your point, Trey Wilson was a guy I have gotten excited about before at Florida. And because we've seen it in the big games, we've seen it pop. And of course, when it's an injury, it does make you feel a little bit more of that hopey. I'm like, well, what if he just had unlimited? What if injuries were off? Then what?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get the same snap share that he got at Florida. Like, I think that's going to be a little bit tougher for him. But like having some of those moments, you're like, man, you're so glad you have him on third down. And that's just a veteran in the room that kind of understands it. And wow, like what a nice addition for that team to be able to make. Okay, veteran receivers. Let's keep up with that. Eric Singleton, guy who maybe taking Trey Wilson's spot at Florida. I thought about Dallas Wilson here, but too small of a sample size probably for him to be a true comeback guy. So I went with Singleton here, and I was wondering about our criteria, Will, because Singleton wasn't basura last year, but he did willingly pick to play in the Hugh Freeze offense. So coming back from playing in that,
1.5 strikes right there. All right.
Right. Different career arc than someone like Cam Coleman, because I would argue Eric Singleton was the go-to guy at Georgia Tech in 2024. And he's now in a situation where you think the surroundings are, interestingly enough, going to be better than what he was in last year, because he's reuniting with Buster Faulkner. He probably has some rapport with Aaron Philo, but I don't know that it's like you can say, oh, well, those two guys know each other extensively. I would imagine that their time together at Georgia Tech, Aaron Philo was mostly working with the second teamers, probably had some reps with the first teamers, but pretty limited with what Aaron Philo did on the field in terms of like having a true connection with him. But you've had the offseason, and now Aaron Philo wins this job. And so you're taking some of those pieces from that Georgia Tech offense and saying, let's see if that can trade that year one floor elevated with that offense this year. So I am intrigued. I don't know what his upside is, because I do think that receiver room was really good. And I don't know that you need him to be this like 80 catch type guy or something like that. But Eric Singleton's a good player. A lot of people were really high on him last year and just felt like kind of the surroundings let him down a bit. It's kind of hard to point the finger at him when we know what the quarterback and the offense was, what it was.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there as far as I don't really expect like a All-American receiver at Florida, probably not even an All-SEC receiver, but a guy that keeps the lights on, keeps the defense honest, while Jaden Ball just punches them in the mouth over and over again is what I'd like to see.
Run the ball.
Run the ball. Exactly. Love that. That's a little bit of swamp cage in there. Yeah.
I didn't come up with that. I didn't. By the way, many Florida people have come up with that well before I did. I cannot take credit.
That's good. I would be saying that, but no. Point being, like, I'm not predicting. Just okay. Every route we're gonna throw it up and he's down there somewhere. It's gonna be more about, can he break away? Can he like get those safeties? Kind of like double checking. And so yeah, I think that creates a lot of mismatches in a lot of situations, specifically in this offense that, to your point, he has familiarity with. So I think in that world, it could be a dream fit if we're believing the things in the offseason from Florida, which I keep doing. We'll see.
Let's whip through a couple of these last candidates here. I got 4 more to throw at you, maybe 5. Austin Simmons / Caden Lee. They're a package deal. They're a package deal coming from Ole Miss to Mizzou. And we know that Simmons is trying to overcome what was a basura start last year in a new place. You could argue that the sample size is too small, and like, what's he trying to come back from? I think that's fair. More of a post-hype guy than a true comeback guy. But I thought there was a world in which this was the most prolific quarterback wide receiver tandem in the SEC last year, and it didn't play out that way. If that world does exist in Columbia, I don't know that it would be stunning. But I do find myself wondering, did Simmons get enough of an opportunity last year to be able to work through those mistakes? Is he still going to deal with some of those dud games in which you're like, man, 3rd interception by Austin Simmons this game? Really? The defense is actually doing pretty well right now, and they're only in this spot. Like, Mizzou should be up 2 touchdowns, and instead they're in a dogfight late because of these turnovers. After that Kentucky game, he only threw 20 passes, 12 of which were against FCS competition. I do like that Mizzou was so decisive with Simmons. They named him the starter early, because I think he's the type of talent that's worth taking a flyer on if you do want to present the threat of offensive balance. We talked about that philosophical change that Eli Drinkwitz is making. Will Simmons or Bo Pribula at Virginia have a better year? And that's something worth mentioning. Last year we talked about Bo Pribula versus Drew Aller, And I would argue Bo Prabula was the better player when healthy, both of which, ended up banged up last year. But Simmons should have better surroundings than Bo Prabula, but I would argue that Prabula has probably a more favorable road to success. Worth noting, Simmons doesn't play a power conference team who had a winning record until week 6, but then Mizzou faces 5 teams that won double-digit games last year. So good luck with that.
Well, he's got a lot of runway. This is the first one that is a little bit harder for me to see, right? I think that if Lane Kiffin says, hey, D2 guy at Fair State, who, we know who Trinidad Chambliss is now, but Lane kept giving him chances and he just couldn't figure it out. We heard about how smart he was, how young he was. Oh, he's football, old, whatever. I think that if Lane Kiffin says, I don't really see it with you to the point where I'm going to take this chance, you go play for Chip Lindsey and you still have turnover issues. It's like, buddy, you are going to end up a lot of read option situations. I kind of wish they had gone with a guy a little bit more like Prabula, especially with that new OC, to say, hey, we're at least going to make the quarterback a threat in the run game a little bit more than Simmons has been, a guy that has, struggled with injuries and all that. So I don't know. I don't love the fit here. And to your point, naming the starter can be good, but I think for a guy like that, it could be overconfident. I'd almost rather him take it down to the wire and say like, hey, you need to prove it. So I don't know. I'm not loving what I see out of him. Maybe the Mizzou offense could be good, but I don't think it'll be because of him.
Yeah, he just didn't want all these loaded boxes for Hardy and Roberts. You could see that coming a mile away. Like guys, a Doak Walker finalist, preseason All-American. Everybody and their mother is going to dare Mizzou to throw the football if they get someone that's just a running threat. And coming into last season, that's what Bo Prabula was. He was the running threat. And if they just kind of ran it back with a quarterback that was really similar, like, all right, man, like I don't know that our offensive line is capable of handling this. Like we're good up front, but I don't know that we're capable of handling this game in, game out. They're still going to be a run first team. But I think the decision to go with someone that is definitely a pass first type quarterback, that's what Austin Simmons has been to this point in his career, is at least interesting from that standpoint. I definitely see the logic in it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work out. 2 guys here that I don't think the casual college football fan would put on this list, but I think they're worth discussing. Whit Weeks and Suntarine Perkins. And I grouped them here for a reason. I think Weeks is more eligible than Perkins, but these are a couple of linebackers who were getting preseason All-America love and then didn't finish as All-SEC players. Like Weeks is coming off the last year. He was coming off that fibula injury that he suffered in the bowl game, like gets carted off the field. And it's like this whole scene. And he was just never quite right. I know he played pretty well in that Ole Miss game in which he boots and rallies, ironically enough. But he missed basically half the year. Interesting that LSU notes in Whit Weeks' bio that they were 1-4 without him. Obviously a really important player. And think about it. The most noteworthy Whit Weeks moment last year was finding out that he was dating Landry Kiffin. Like, on the field, it just wasn't the year that you thought it was going to be from a guy that seemed to be as set it and forget it as any player in the SEC, and it just didn't end up that way. So, and then Perkins is someone who I would argue had a similar uphill climb to what we talked about with Dylan Stewart, where all of a sudden you looked around and go, oh man, a lot of new faces. All these guys I was playing around the year before when I had this awesome year, they're in the NFL. And I think it was a little bit tougher for him to kind of have those splash performances. Did not earn all SEC honors at season's end. The sack numbers went from 10.5 to 4.5, and they played 15 games. Didn't have a sack until week 10. He did have one of the biggest plays of the season for Ole Miss when Georgia just forgot to block him on that 4th down with like 9 minutes left in the Sugar Bowl. And he got like the easiest sack that he had all year, probably. He was still a disruptive player, but also had some of those tough moments where tackling in space wasn't necessarily his forte. Like he had the 3 missed tackles against Miami. But I don't think the casual player would bring these guys up as comeback candidates because they didn't necessarily fade from the national conversation. But I think Whit Weeks and Suntarine Perkins are 2 guys that, like, if they popped this year and did have All-American type seasons, I think they'd be eligible.
Yeah, I love the inclusion of these 2 because Perkins is a guy who, again, we talked about all preseason. The Ole Miss team played really well, right? And he went deep into the postseason. So everybody kind of thought like, okay, well, he probably was a big part of that. But to your point, it's individual success versus team success. Couldn't really put it together individually, but I'm sure as a defensive player, kind of captain that defense, you'd rather the team succeed. Weeks, I'm right there with you. And I was going to bring up that stat about the record without him. I feel like at the minute he went down, was when LSU's defense started to crumble, particularly against mobile quarterbacks. And to your point, I mean, hey, if the most memorable moment in your season preseason is just throwing up an entire pot of coffee in front of your girl's dad as he beats you at a football game, and then you get injured, and then he becomes your head coach. It's kind of a comedy of errors. I think you're definitely eligible for comeback player of the year. That's a thing that happened to him last year, despite playing good football when he played.
That's what I always say. If that's that's the most noteworthy thing, then. Anybody else that needs to be added? I thought about John Mateer here. Is he worth including for comeback player of the year?
Mateer's a good one. I think that Mateer, if we could just get that first 4 or 5 weeks of Mateer before the injury that he didn't want to talk about with me, I think Mateer is a big deal.
Anybody else that you felt like as we were having these conversations would be, I'm sure I missed somebody, but it's a watch list. We can always add guys to the watch list. This is just preseason watch list. There's a reason why we were kind of far and wide. We want to make sure we didn't leave any of these guys out, though. It's kind of inevitable at this point. And again, we're not talking about breakout guys. We're talking about guys that like, hey, they were really good. Now they're 2023, 2024. And last year it just didn't work out for whatever reason, or maybe even for the last 2 years, it didn't work out. And this year, if they had a huge year, they would be eligible for comeback player of the year. But I think it's a fun thing to kind of track and follow, because college careers are longer than what they've been in the past. And some guys, that they can have these very non-linear paths to success. And I think it's worth highlighting.
The entire Auburn offense. No, I'm with you.
We're going to come back for what, though?
Themselves. Yeah. Hugh Freeze. Oh, no, that being said, it's a good thing to track kind of as the year gets going, because there are so many of these guys who go, oh, I remember him. So, yeah, I think we have all of our greatest hits on here. The guy that popped into my mind I saw. So, yeah.
All right, let's get to Jim Dunaway. He understands the dynamics at play in Tuscaloosa as much as anyone, of course. So we discussed Keelon Russell as one of the most intriguing players in all of college football this year. So here is Jim Dunaway. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is the legend, teammate, Jim Dunaway. Jim, we had a conversation on Friday on the Conor O'Gara show that was basically devoted to QB1, the race in Alabama. And since then, we have had a starter named, of course, Keelon Russell named the starter on Saturday, what many expected for a very long time. And we talked about Austin Mack, and there's some things that I want to revisit with him and his story. But just the initial reaction when you heard that happen on Saturday, that Bama is indeed going with Keelon Russell, the redshirt freshman, sophomore, or whatever you want to call him.
Well, this is what everyone expected. I will tell you that it has tremendously energized and excited the Alabama fan base. This was the guy the Alabama fans wanted because of what he was coming out of high school. A 5-star recruit, one of the best recruits in college football, and he had picked Alabama, and he hung around. Didn't have to hang around after last season, and he hung around to battle for the starting job. And everybody had seen his high school highlights coming out of Duncanville, Texas. He was a winner. He was a champion, and he made wild plays. And I think that is what Alabama fans are looking for. And when you hear the description, the scouting report on him has always been a taller, more durable Bryce Young. And though Bryce Young didn't win a championship at Alabama, he did play for a national championship. I guess he's an SEC champion, but he didn't win a national champion. But there's some fond memories of Bryce Young in Tuscaloosa. So to think you get another crack at Bryce Young talent, that has a lot of people excited. But this is about the wow factor, and we were just waiting for that acknowledgement from Ryan Grubb, the OC, and Kalen DeBoer that it would be Keelon Russell. And they finally gave it. But I do think it was a tough competition. I think Austin Mack's that good of a quarterback.
Yeah, that's the part that needs to be remembered in all of this. And I'm one that's tried to temper my expectations for Keelon Russell to a certain extent. And the excitement that I have for him based on everything that I've heard about him is that, and I've made the comp to righty Michael Penix before. Like, I don't think he's going to show up and look like righty Michael Penix. But I think that's the hope for this staff, that he can develop into it. That's why they recruited him as heavily and as strongly as the way that they did. And that's why they're making this move instead of going with a guy that, we need to remember this. They have invested more time into Austin Mack than any quarterback that they've ever worked with, this staff. Okay. And that's an important thing for someone who is in year 4. And so for those wondering, well, why didn't they name Keelon Russell the guy in spring? Or why didn't they name him the guy in the first week of fall camp? It's like, well, they wanted to see this thing through, man. And if you are dismissing Austin Mack and what he has meant, I think, to this staff, I think that would be foolish, because for all we know, he's going to end up playing a role with this team this year.
That's exactly right. I know you and I have talked about it several times. What a luxury to have a guy who was QB1B maybe in the quarterback competition, that close, still in your quarterback room. Not everybody has that in college football. I'll look at Miami, for example. If Mensah goes down, can anybody tell me how good Miami's backup quarterback is? Could that derail their season? I think it could. At Alabama, there's a good chance that if you lose Keelon Russell for a game or two the rest of the season, that it may stay on course with Austin Mack. That's the talent you have there. And then you and I discussed on the Conor O'Gara show on Friday, just the fact that they recruited the kid from high school to Washington. He came with DeBoer to Tuscaloosa. It's like a family member for these guys, and you wanted to give him every chance to win the job.
And I think what's going to be interesting now with Austin Mack and him moving forward, because everybody expects like after this year, I mean, if Keelon Russell holds down the starting job, he's the guy, then Austin Mack will inevitably hit the transfer portal and he'll get the perhaps like the Kenny Minchie type billing of guy that the staff is just talking so highly of. And you wonder, you kind of look back at the guys that he sat behind. It's like, all right, well, he sat behind Michael Penix. He sat behind and entrenched Jalen Milroe. He sat behind Ty Simpson, who went on to be a first-round quarterback after 1 year as a starter. And then if Keelon Russell's the guy, then like you'll look back on those four and say, well, we really don't know what the floor is for this guy yet. I don't know what it says about him if he can't win the starting job, like in these situations, but I am interested in his next step. You know, I think Keelon, everybody's trying to figure out what his ceiling is in year one, because, you know, when he's in the same sentence as Bryce Young, the only thing that I would push back on and say, well, Bryce Young came into a situation where Alabama was preseason number 2. This team is preseason number 13 with its lowest preseason ranking in 18 years, of course. So what do you think that looks like for him? If I say, Jim, give me a ceiling on his game and what you think he can be, if everything kind of lines up this year, what does that look like?
Well, first off, I think you have to address when we compare him to Bryce Young, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs, who's pretty darn good in the NFL back there. The receiving core may be as good as the one that Bryce Young has, but I think most people would argue that they may be a level below that. And then the offensive line's a question. So he's not inheriting Bryce Young's situation. What does the season look like good for Keelon Russell? He makes the innovative plays that can bail out an offensive line that has not been up to Alabama standards in recent years. And that goes back to end of Nick Saban's time, not just under Kalen DeBoer. And I believe he eventually wins that job over Austin Mack because of his ability to do things off script. And I'm not talking about running the football. Austin Mack's a good runner as well. Both of these guys can get out of the pocket. But I think Keelon Russell, at least what the coaches and people who've seen the scrimmages have told me, is that he can take a play that's broken down and turn it into a positive. And if you watched Alabama football last year, Ty Simpson had to do that a lot. I mean, a lot. And that's something that I think the coaches were looking for, knowing their situation with the run game and the offensive line. So to me, a good season for Keelon Russell is getting Alabama to the playoffs. That's the standard here, is being a playoff championship contender. And I know he's a first-year starter. I've said it several times. I believe this roster is built for success next year on the elite level, but that doesn't mean it's not good enough to be a playoff team this year. So a good season means he bails them out of a lot of trouble. They win a lot of football games and they go to the playoffs. That's why he chose to come to Alabama. That's why Jet Tomala, who's had a great camp, is still in that quarterback room. He could have gone to a lot of places. He's at Alabama. It's why Elijah Haven, a 5-star quarterback, is committed to come next year. They want to come to play for the pressure cooker that is Alabama to be a championship contender.
One of the things that the situation kind of reminds me of is year 2, Bryce, where his best receiver is Jermaine Burton. And there are a lot of different ways we can go with that conversation. I've made my feelings known about him as a player, as a person. But I think that you also need to see a guy who can make that receiver room better, because the guy that was best in that room last year of getting separation within the concept of the route, that just knew how to find the soft spot in the zone, that could get off of press, that could just do all those little things really well, that was Jeremy Bernard, and he's gone. 100%. So all these other guys, on this team, Ryan Coleman-Williams, Aladi Brooks when he's healthy. You know, they lose Isaiah Horton, obviously, but like they're expecting some of these young guys to be able to step up as well. I think that's a key box to check of like, look, you in a weird way, like you actually need to roll the dice on like the more athletic, younger guy who can extend plays and stay behind the line of scrimmage to make that receiver room better, because I don't know that I necessarily trust them to be able to kind of get those like separation type looks off the ball in the way that I think there are a lot of different situations where if you had a receiver room that was already capable of doing that from the jump, I think we could even be talking about Austin Mack as the starter instead of Keelon Russell.
And truthfully, that has been the scouting report on Keelon Russell in his time at Alabama. He has the swagger, if you want to call it swagger, the guts, if you want to call it guts, to throw footballs into tight windows. Now, what that has led to in some of the scrimmages and such is interceptions. But, you know, in game situations against the competition Alabama is going to play, you can't always take the conservative route. There's got to be some times that you got to have the guts and the swagger to throw into tight windows like you have to do in the NFL. And Russell's not afraid to do that. He's a playmaker. Every player you talk to on the team tells you about wild plays that Russell has made from the quarterback position in his time in Tuscaloosa. So I think you're dead on there. That's why he's won this job. There's a bigger upside for him.
What do you think this means for the coaching staff, knowing that the first two quarterbacks they had at Alabama were guys that were too good to start? If you talk about an entrenched Jalen Milroe coming off a top 10 finish in the Heisman voting, Ty Simpson, the former 5-star quarterback who was further along than those other quarterbacks in the room, and Austin Mack, Keelon Russell, obviously. And now it's their guy. Like, to me, this makes it a no excuses situation. How important do you think this is for how we're going to talk about the likes of Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb 3-4 years from now?
I think Ryan Grubb has a lot more on his legacy at Alabama than Kalen DeBoer does right now. You know, the new contract extension. I'm not one of those guys that believes Kalen DeBoer's job's is in jeopardy this year, but Ryan Grubb is a guy that who was tremendous with Kalen DeBoer everywhere. Went to the Seahawks, didn't come to Alabama, and it did not work. He leaves Seattle, they win the Super Bowl. He comes to Tuscaloosa. It's one of the worst running games in Alabama history. So I think a lot of pressure is on Ryan Grubb. And as you said, this is their guy. This is the guy they wanted. Quarterback room is not a problem in Tuscaloosa. It is what Adrian Clem and whatever they can pull out of that offensive line and get a run game this year. And some of that is going to be Ryan Grubb. Does his scheme, does his playbook create a running game in the defensive nightmare that is the SEC? I mean, you have big guys in the middle of that clogged up running lanes. You have fast linebackers. You have fast edge guys. You have safeties and corners that are not afraid to come down and put their head into a running gap and make a tackle. So as Grubb this offseason come up with some schemes that work in the SEC with the talent they have in Tuscaloosa. And that's why I go back to Keelon Russell winning this job. I think everything he does could loosen things up to help that running game a little bit. And if Alabama finds, I'm not even talking top 5 in the conference. I mean, if they get 8 to 10 running game in the conference, if they're just better than 6 SEC teams at running the football in the conference, then we're talking about a defense that is good enough for this to be a playoff team. Just a little bit of running game will free their offense up, I think, to score enough points to make Alabama very dangerous.
Flirt with mediocrity. That's the goal, which is a weird thing to say about the Bama running game. But, you know, if you think about it, Kalen DeBoer got this job because of what 2023 Washington was. In 2023 Washington, yes, it was very one-dimensional in the run game with Dylan Johnson, but they did enough, at least, to be able to get to the national championship. And then once Dylan Johnson got banged up, it was really tough for them to kind of pivot away from that. But they did enough, and they did enough because they checked so many of those other boxes. I mean, that offensive line won the Joe Moore Award, most notably because of the pass protection and why it excelled in those specific areas. But, you know, I do think that if we are going to look at this Bama team and say, hey, this guy emerged, this guy stepped up. I do think that it's going to have to take like a superstar running back type performance for us to say those things about Alabama. And I don't know so much that it's going to be a collective timeshare where it's going to be like, oh, the hot hand this week, the hot hand. I don't think Ryan Grubb is good enough as a ground game schemer to warrant that type. And I think it's going to be a guy who we just have to look and go, man, he broke tackles. He did this. He did this. Who's the guy that you think steps up and is that guy in the Bama backfield, if there is one?
It's going to be it's probably eventually going to be AK Deer late in the year. I think the plan is that they have him back for the Georgia game, healthy enough to play and maybe be 100% for the Georgia game, which will be big. But when you start talking about this running back room right now, Crowell is starting to practice now. He's an elite 5-star running back. He hasn't done a ton, but everyone's talking about 3-star running back Trayshawn Brown, the kid that they got from Boise State. I mean, he was going to Boise State, and Alabama ended up making a late offer when they had a spot open up to him. And he's a guy that you hear from practice that is great at picking up blitzes. He's really good at blocking, doing all the little things. He can catch it out of the backfield enough. He can hit the right hole, seize the holes. Because it's not like when you and I played. Well, at least when I played, they'd call, right 32, and the three player would run through the 2 gap. That's not the running game anymore, right? You read and you go with the ebb and the flows of the block, and Brown apparently has just great vision as well. So that won't surprise me that if he's the guy early on. Crowell, I think, has star potential, but eventually I do believe it'll be AK Deer. But I'll add this. Alabama not really known as an RPO team, really. Maybe a little bit more RPO with Keelon Russell and this run game just to loosen up everything. Let that young quarterback be the wheeler dealer he is and make some calls and early decisions at the line and try to free up the run game. If the box is there and he likes it, he hands it off. If not, it's a quick pass and let these great receivers run with it. Maybe a little RPO addition, a little more RPO addition for Alabama.
Everybody's talking about Ryan Coleman-Williams and the potential of a bounce back year, new number, new name, new mindset, all of it. We saw him in SEC Media Days. I asked him, do you feel like a 19-year-old? And he's just like, oh, no, that's a good question. Like, I don't know. A lot of things in my life don't really like. I've been on the cover of a video game. Is he married already? I mean, Ryan Coleman-Williams does not live the life of a 19-year-old, and therefore the conversations about him are not that of a 19-year-old. What is a fair expectation for that guy this year, who still enters as one of the most polarizing players in the country?
He had star moments his freshman year. He was a national scapegoat. I just rewatched Alabama-Oklahoma playoff game over the weekend, and twice during the game, Fowler and Herbstreit mentioned leading the nation in drops. One of them after a pretty bad 3rd down drop.
He had 10 last year.
Yeah. And so he let the ball get to his shoulder. He was out of whack all of last year. He's married. As you pointed out, I feel like he aged 4 years during last year. That's how bad of a year it was from him with everything going on. Everyone around Alabama's camp has talked about the work he's put in, even when it wasn't a work day, he was at the facility working, catching balls off the jug machines, and doing things that leaders are supposed to do, but also that elite receivers do around the country. I think last year was a wake-up call for him, that his unbelievable skill set isn't enough at this level if you don't put in elite level work. And I believe he became a professional this offseason after being a scapegoat for this team, getting blown out and losing some games last year. I expect him to have an unbelievable season. And even if, and this happened a lot last year too, until it became obvious that he wasn't having a great year. But you can go back and look at the Tennessee game in specific and a couple of other games early in the year. He was used as a decoy a lot. He would run through the defense and draw a couple of guys to free up Jeremy Bernard. So maybe a little less decoy for Coleman-Williams this year, and maybe he makes a few more plays.
Also didn't help that he gets banged up in that opener, just a nightmare opener against Florida State, wherein he's one of the scapegoats, he and Bray Hubbard. And then Lottie Brooks steps into the slot and then like plays the role that he thought he was going to be playing in all offseason, when he thought he was going to be operating this way. And instead of this being like a year 2 progression, it was an obvious year 2 regression. What do you think of my bold prediction that Lottie Brooks leads Bama in receiving? And I made that prediction before he got banged up in fall camp.
Yeah. I can see it. I can see it. I'll go off the board, and I'm going to say Derek Meadows becomes this year's Jeremy Bernard.
Oh, that's spicy.
That'd be my bold prediction, that maybe he doesn't lead the team in receptions, but I believe 6'5" Derek Meadows, who got banged up in the Missouri game last year, that he becomes the great pass route runner. And with those great superstars in Brooks and Coleman-Williams, he's the guy that's open 7 yards downfield underneath and runs after he makes the catch. I like the Meadows kid.
Do you think he's the reason that they let Isaiah Horton walk?
Sure. I mean, that and money. I think Alabama does a wonderful job of managing payroll. They don't have the biggest payroll in the SEC. I don't know where they rank, but I know it's not Texas A&M, LSU. And at some point you decide, okay, am I going to pay Lottie Brooks? Am I going to pay Ryan Coleman-Williams? Am I paying 5-star Sindarian Morgan? Paying a 5-star, secondary guy? I've got quarterbacks coming in. At some point, how many receivers do you pay elite money? And when you have Horton's size, and his production last year was good enough to get him offers from somewhere else financially, at some point, it's not, I don't want to say a small market Major League Baseball team, but at some point you make financial decisions. And I think Horton probably was a financial decision.
Last one for you. I'm guessing this doesn't change the record prediction for you, because we've been talking about Keelon Russell as the expected starter the entire offseason. But now, as you sit here and we're just ahead of week 0, what is your overall prediction for this Bama team? How does it end? What are the conversations?
To me, on the upside, they're 10-2. Downside, I think they're 9-3 team. I think they're right on the bubble of a playoff team again this year. The schedule is so perfect for a new quarterback to go in. East Carolina had a really good year last year, but because of the portal, all those guys are gone. I think that's a great first start at home. You go at Kentucky. It's an SEC game. I can in my head, see Alabama winning that game 20-10. 20-13, and everybody's like, ooh.
But it's a new look defense, which if you're going to play an SEC team on the road, you want to see a defense as inexperienced as Kentucky's.
Then you come home to Florida State, and I think they boat race them with all the emotions. And then the games after that, leading into Georgia, I think they're dogfights. I think they survive South Carolina, survive Mississippi State, and then they go into Georgia, and people are saying, yeah, they haven't really wowed anybody. They haven't really beaten anybody. And then you'll see how good they are against Georgia, because I think Georgia's dang good. But I'll go 10-2 and making the playoffs. And maybe 10-2 is also in Atlanta playing Georgia for the SEC championship again.
Wouldn't it be funny if that just happened yet again?
Yet again.
Oh, geez. Jim Dunaway. Appreciate it. By the way, Jim working on 2 hours of sleep, dealing with he's got a jaw issue right now that he's battling through. He's playing hurt. He's got Sport and State podcast, first day of it, that by the time people are listening to this, it'll have already launched. But just a man with many things on his plate. Grateful that you were able to make time for us on the OG kickoff. Appreciate it, man.
And speaking at the Rotary Club, I'm not even sure I know what the Rotary Club is. I mean, that's not trees, right? That's a different organization. I think these are young businessmen or something. Rotary Club, is that what it is?
I get the Rotary Club and the Shriners Club mixed up, because one of them has the cool hats.
Right,
the Fez hats, which I don't know who designed those, but let's bring those back. Let's get everybody wearing those.
With what is it called, a fez or something?
It's like a tassel, like a graduation tassel that goes on it.
Yeah. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't want to be in a bowling league either. That sounds like one step. We do that one night. We go to bowling league the next night, and then I don't know. We have a
don't hate on the bowling league.
Night.
Don't hate on the bowling league. Wrong person to say that to, Jim. Wrong person to say that to.
That's see the difference between the North and the South right there. Bowling
Very
league.
much.
Yeah,
Very
we were
much.
slow pitch softball and kickball.
Same. My wife played competitive kickball as a kid. True story. So
wow.
we cover all the boxes in the Midwest.
Fantastic. Hey,
Thanks,
I owe
man.
you a ALS challenge. I did not get to that this weekend. I'm gonna get to it.
You're good. You're good.
Okay.
We'll make it happen. I appreciate it as always, man.
All right, buddy.
All right, Will. Lad of the week. Who you got?
So in honor of our ALS Ice Bucket Challenge or Ice Tupperware Challenge in your case, right? I'm gonna go
whoa. I knew you shamed me with the bucket. That bucket is big. You saw it's more wide than it is tall.
If you could store a slice of pizza or a little casserole, it's not a bucket. Okay,
you're bucket shaming me.
I'm bucket shaming you.
That bucket is large.
You got the Baby Gap bucket going. That's all I'm saying.
Yours was a traditional bucket, and mine was stretched out more. It's like one of those like massive salad bowls that you can put like an entire week's worth of food in there.
A Wildcat bucket, not traditional. No,
I knew you shame me.
I'm just playing with you because I had hit by just like you did, like after a workout, and I felt like I was getting waterboarded, bro. You saw me in the middle of my video just go.
I too.
And so yeah, bro. But no, that being said, my last of the week is Chris Johnson, who brought back the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. If you guys saw it on our feeds, we're bringing back 2012, right? So go to ALS
2014,
you're right. But yeah, go to als.org/donate. I hit mine, challenge my three buddies, they're gonna hit theirs. But yeah, just Orlando legend for East Carolina, and then the Tennessee Titans guy that we loved a ton watching growing up. So sad to see him going through that, but love to do a little social media challenge, especially for a great cause.
Wekiva High School, shout out. That's where Claire would go to high school if we stayed in the school district. Interesting enough. Yeah. But it's been really cool to see the response. Like since this diagnosis, just a crippling disease. If anybody knows someone that's been affected by it, they've seen the impact, and it is just such a devastating thing to watch someone endure. So it's cool being able to kind of see that, back into the mainstream, and hopefully we're going to continue to raise some money for it. So was glad to include you as well as Jim Dunaway and my brother with that. Even though you just bucket shamed me, and now I'm like, dang, I should have just. I knew right when you did the video you were bucket shaming me. I was like, wait, what? Hater.
Well, I went to a Home Depot because all I had was like the big, like the previous used paint buckets. I was like, I'll end up with some type of poisoning. So I had to make a little trip. So, like I said, I had to represent for the ATL, get the biggest, most bright orange bucket. So, hey, man, it was cold all the same.
It was. All right, I'm going with Sammie Coates. The former Auburn receiver did something absolutely awesome last weekend. He ended Columbia High School's 11-year losing streak. Okay. Circa 2015, not quite 2014. 101 consecutive losses Columbia High School had endured. The longest losing streak in the country. The last time that they had won a game before this past weekend, Coates was a rookie with the Steelers. His first win as a head coach after they were 0-10 last year. So many people were fired up for him, and understandably so. Great video, if you saw this, from Thomas Ashworth, of Sammie just getting interviewed post game. Students in the background are like rushing the field. He's like drenched with the Gatorade bath. And I was thinking there were probably students rushing the field who were like, they're 14 or 15 years old. If you're a freshman, sophomore rushing the field, who didn't even remember a time in which their high school team won a game. I mean, that's just insane. Absolutely insane. And I've always had, if you've listened to us on It Just Meant More, I've had such great respect for Sammie Coates, knowing how run heavy those teams were and how much it probably sucked to be an Auburn receiver at times in those offenses when it's like, you're going to get out there and block. And every once in a while, like Nick Marshall's going to scoot away and you better find the soft spot in the zone. But man, for a guy to be in that offense and still end up as a second team All SEC receiver, tip of the cap. Auburn did not have an All SEC receiver at season's end after Coates until Keandre Lambert-Smith was able to do that in 2024. But Coates had one of the more forgotten clutch plays ever, and I watched this the other day. 2013 Iron Bowl was only tied because Nick Marshall did exactly what I just said, which was like scoot away on the RPO, scramble, he finds Coates, 33 seconds left. It's a walk-in touchdown for him. But yeah, man, awesome to see this. So many people rooting for Sammie Coates, and they won 41-14. So some are saying Columbia High School now a wagon now that they got Sammie Coates running the show.
And that is Columbia High School in Huntsville, Alabama. Have to qualify because apparently every state has a town called Columbia. But yeah, that being said, we talked about this, some of the just bit more stuff where you ended up being kind of a handyman if you were a wide receiver for Auburn. Talking about that with CJ Uzomah too, where it's like, whoa, this guy's really talented. And so, yeah, I mean, a guy that has had such a big impact on college football and was a very good player in the NFL. And to like come back and say, hey, I'm going to completely, it's one thing to take over a powerhouse program and kind of be like, oh, we already got the momentum. It's another to just go into a season and know these guys have been hopeless and downtrodden and rally the boys. Like, there's nothing more American than that. It's just rebuild a high school football team. Like, dudes rock, man.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. All right, that'll do it. We put a lot into today's pod. Like I said, I think the plan for Friday, we're going to talk about some of the quarterback decisions that have been made. I know we talked about Keelon Russell, but there's other stuff that I want to be able to get into now that as of this recording, Vandy's the only ICC team that has not named a starting quarterback, which last time that had happened, Diego Pavia happened. So who knows? Jared Curtis, Diego Pavia, some are saying. So that's going to be the plan for Friday. Email us, theogkickoff@gmail.com. We'd love to be able to hear from you. We're going to do more mailbag episodes in the future. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to the next round as well as the OG Kickoff on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter, the OG Kickoff, CJ O'Gara. Go so hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.